Today, my guest is Hugh Churchward, and I'm very excited to be able to speak with you today about some of your business challenges and journeys over the last quite a number of years that you've been in business. So, Hugh, would you like to introduce yourself, share a bit about who you are, who you help, and what you do?
So as Alicia said, I'm Hugh Churchward. I'm a somatic psychotherapist. And as part of that, I also was taught to do a bodywork modality called orthobionomy. So this is kind of part of the challenges that we will be speaking about, is that these are two seemingly disparate things that I do and how to bring that together. So who do I help? There's several people I help. One, I work with people with mental health issues as a psychotherapist, but also I help people with injuries, with physical trauma, with emotional trauma as well through working with the orthobionomy. Yeah, so my training was I had a 5-year experiential psychotherapy training back in the 90s, and just with professional development, that's just continued and deepened, but also with the orthobionomy, that training's just been ongoing. And I'm now instructing in that as a modality as well.
I think even before we were having this interview, I love, even though for you it feels like they're quite different at times, the way that you can bring the mind-body connection through the different modalities that you've trained in and work with in the body, I think is incredibly powerful. And I think many of us get into this industry on hands-on body work and all of a sudden discover that we accidentally became counselors, and we're listening to all these things, and then sometimes people present to us with quite intense, it might be trauma or something that they're journeying through, and it's like all of a sudden you're like, whoa, I need someone else to actually refer to here, because this is well beyond, I'm yelling at my kids and my husband, or my kids and my partner, and I'm just kind of a bit sick of my life, and this is very much into a lot more in-depth thing. So I think that you have such a unique skill set to be able to not only have this conversation today, but also with the experience that you have in both modalities. Tell us a bit about what are some of the challenges that you've experienced in business over the years that you've been practicing.
Well, it's interesting because as I finished my psychotherapy training, which was back in 2002, 2003, I think 6 months prior, they just brought in the Medicare rebates for psychologists. And so I think back then they could offer 16 sessions, which were paid for through Medicare. And suddenly the prospect of becoming a psychotherapist became a whole lot harder. And what's been interesting in that is that I think that's kind of changed the nature of the expectation around psychological services, because psychotherapy tends to be quite long-term, medium to long-term. So it's talking kind of months to years. But this kind of set up the expectation that mental health issues could be dealt with between 8 and 16 weeks. And sometimes that's true, and we learn the skills to be able to carry that on. But for a lot of people, especially if there's been some serious developmental trauma or more difficult mental health issues, that takes a lot longer. So I think so that's kind of in two of the big challenges, is the changing landscape of psychological services. Now, fortunately now and these names may not mean much to you, but with people like Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote The Body Keeps the Score, and also the Blue Knot Foundation, who is a foundation that advocates for people with who have had developmental trauma and childhood sexual abuse and the like. The way they talk about the body has really brought somatic psychotherapy a bit more to the fore. And so even among psychologists, there's much more interest in how the working with the body can contribute to helping people to regulate, but also helping people to resolve their trauma. So that's kind of been a challenge, but then that's also started to change. I think the other thing that's been a challenge is the modality that I've chosen to do, the bodywork modality, the orthobionomy. No one's heard of it. And it's been really difficult for myself and a lot of us to get orthobionomy onto the map so that people think, oh, I've got pain. I'll go and see someone who does orthobionomy, or people tend to think I've got trauma. I must go and see someone who has orthobionomy. But I think they've been the two main structural challenges. And then there's been the personal challenges of actually kind of thinking in terms of business.
Yeah.
Actually, instead of thinking in terms of being a clinician who does this thing, but now that's not much use if people aren't coming to see you because you've got no business sense or got no idea of how to establish and develop a business, which is kind of where I'm at the moment after 20 years.
Look, I think you have such a powerful skill set, and I love, and I'm looking forward to kind of unpacking a bit of how you've had to creatively deal with those particular challenges in the environment in your chosen modalities. And also, I think you speak to something that a lot of people face, a lot of therapists face, in that I've got all these wonderful, amazing skill sets. I have no idea how to tell people that this is what they actually need. And I liken it a little bit to like having a Maserati, like a really lovely car on the driveway, but it has no fuel and no keys. It looks gorgeous, but if you can't drive it, there's kind of not that there's no point to having a car like that, but the purpose to the car is that it is used and that it is driven around, and probably for people to look at it. And I would say it's similar with us when we have an amazing skill set of modalities that we know can help in an excellent way. Then being able to, actually learn how to do the business side of things and not just the technician side of things, I think is like when you get the keys to the car and put some petrol in it, and all of a sudden you can start driving it around.
To take that analogy further, I think it's even more than that, because for a long time it wasn't even a full car in the driveway. It was bits and pieces just sort of scattered around. So you can put the fuel in it, it still wasn't going to go anywhere.
Right.
So it's actually even just kind of setting up the business structures around that, which I guess is analogous to the car going together, that you can then put the fuel in and the bloody thing can run. But it's
as opposed
to for a lot of years,
the chassis on the ground.
it wasn't even a chassis. It was just chassis was here and the engine was there, and then part of the engine was there. The exhaust pipe was back there. It was all over the shop.
Well, you have this saying that it's like sometimes it's like building the plane on the way down. That it's like you don't even realize that you are connecting, that you've got all these pieces all over the place. A beautiful friend of mine, Masami Sato, who started an organization called B1G1, has a gorgeous analogy, and she said, we often connect the dots retrospectively. And I'm sure when you started, you didn't necessarily anticipate having a Maserati on the driveway. You probably looked around one day going, well, I've got a bit over there and I've got a bit over there. And actually, if I kind of pull them together, wow, look at what I could actually, give and create for people.
Well, it starts to take some form. It's not until it's got some form that it becomes kind of more useful, much more useful. But in regards to creative ways, I don't know that I was terribly creative in that I didn't try to find a way. The way I tried to find a way out of the messiness or the chaoticness of it was to fall back on what I knew, which was, okay, so it's not happening here. What do I know? I know how to learn. I know how to reflect. I know how to think about what I'm doing. And so it wasn't so much trying to find a way through, but sitting back and allowing it to become less chaotic in order then to move forward. Because I just found that the more effort in those times, the more effort I put in, just almost the more chaotic it became. So I almost had to sit back. And what I do well is be curious and learn, and to pull disparate things together. But so that's what I would fall back on when things weren't happening. And I've done that umpteen times. That's too many times to remember. But kind of every time I've done that, I've learned a little bit more and deepened my understanding about what it is that I do. I was going to say also about the business, but I don't think that's happened until the last 6 months, actually, since working with you guys, where that's come together quite fast.
And look, I think that when we have the ability to sit in stillness and kind of observe and just sit in the messy and observe what's going on and allow those things to come to the surface. It takes a lot of patience, and it certainly takes a lot of practice for some. However, in my own experience, I know that it has allowed, or what has come from that is a really beautiful, enriched opportunity and outcomes that just kind of just happen out of that chaos. That it, like you said, like it's not forcing it, it's not pushing it, it's not like, right, I've got to, this, it's just like, and it just kind of lands and the universe serves it up and you go, oh yeah, that's what I was going to do. Look at that. There is part of the car that's there already. And it just kind of formed and came together like it should have.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. But having said that, also there's often it was the same things happening again and again. So it was almost like there was this kind of loop. And it's like, oh, here I am again. And so that kind of deepening took a long time, actually.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that what has changed will come out during this discussion, actually. I mean, it's taken a long time. It's taken 20 years to change that, actually, or for that to change.
So how do you, other than sitting back and observing, that's one of the ways that you deal with some of the challenges that come up. How else do you deal with, or do you have any other strategies that you deal with, that you use to deal with if you experience setbacks in your business?
I think it's been the persistence, knowing that what I do is good, knowing it's effective, getting that feedback. Yeah, there's respect from colleagues. So all of that has reminded me not to give up. And I think because prior to doing this, I was a nurse. And it's gotten to the point where the thought of going back to nursing is just like, actually, it's just too soul destroying. So there is no other way than to just keep persevering, because otherwise, and going back to nursing full time wasn't an option. And as long as there was enough money coming in to keep going to pay the bills, then it made persevering worthwhile. And the fact that I love what I do means that even though there may not have been much money coming in at times, there was sustenance in the work itself, and plenty of frustrations, but there was sustenance in the work itself.
I think there's a lot to be said when we burn the bridges. When it's like, I could go back to nursing, but it's not. I'm not doing that. I don't want to do that. Please don't make me do that. Okay, fine. I'll keep my eyes forward. I'll stay in my lane. I'll do what it takes until this is my only option and there is no plan B. And I think a lot of us in small business ownership feel like that, but it's like, my only option at this point is maybe nursing or going back to work at Aldi or Coles or something. And I just know I don't want to do that. So I better get this business stuff sorted. I better figure out what I need to do.
Yeah, I dip my toe in every now and again, just to keep my registration going. And every time I went back, it's just like, I actually do love nursing. I enjoy the interactions with the patients. But it's like, I can't do this. And I can't go back to working. I can't go back to working in a hospital. I can't go back to working within a bureaucracy like that. As a small business owner, you're used to, okay, there's a problem. What do we do about it? And you do something. But you go back into a bureaucracy like health and it's okay, we've got a problem. Okay, let's form a committee or whatever it is, or it's just, that's too hard. We can't do that. And I mean, that's part of what I found so difficult.
Yeah. So when you're in the struggle, or when you're maybe dealing with one of those setbacks, what agreements did you make with yourself, or do you make with yourself? One of them is, I'm not going back. So you make an agreement that says, I'll do whatever it takes. I don't know what I have to do yet, but I'll just do something, as opposed to go back there. That sounds like one of the agreements. Are there any other agreements that you make with yourself when you're in the struggle like that?
There wasn't like an agreement of a kind of negotiation. There wasn't a grand bargain with the devil or with God or with anything. There's perhaps a lot of tolerance on the part of my wife to keep supporting me. And I don't mean necessarily supporting financially, but kind of support me in persevering. But there was no kind of grand bargains or agreements, because it was just persisting in, just wasn't an option. So
Yeah.
It was just kind of keep going, keep going,
Yeah.
keep going.
Yeah. And like, what do you hold on to? What are some of the, either the practices or the beliefs that you have through the persistence? What's something that you kind of go, this is my thing and I'm holding on to it?
I think the effectiveness of the work and how useful it is. So, confidence might be getting knocked around a bit, and then there'll be a session or a couple of sessions or a week where it's just like, oh, this is really effective. This is really useful. I'm really good at what I do. Or there may be a phone call from someone phoning up saying, I've got this going on. What do you, like, from a colleague, and they say, I've got this going on. What do you think? And so there's that reaffirmation that actually this is really useful work. And I've now got over 20 years experience, and what a waste for that accumulated knowledge to not go anywhere as well. So I think they're the main things I hold on to, actually. But the holding on to is kind of an interesting point. And sorry, I'm thinking like a psychotherapist now. But because it's not so much holding on to as there's a real trust and a confidence now. So it's not so much having to hold on to anything, but it's actually being able to let go and trust that actually it'll be okay. Letting go and trust that this is good work, this is effective work. And even if it doesn't happen for me and my generation in regards to orthobionomy, maybe we're setting the ground for the next generation or the generation after that. Maybe it's not going to be another 10, 15 years before people know about this. But that's the role of being in that first 2 or 3 generations of a particular modality as well.
Yeah.
So again, so it's not so much a holding on, but letting go and trusting. Actually, this is effective and it's good, and it's and remembering. It's a remembering of that, actually.
And I think you make a great point there, that when we've been doing this a long time, and I'm in a similar boat that I've been massaging and hands-on now for 21 years, that often I assume a level of knowledge of other people and other practitioners. And when they reflect something back and I think, oh, that's not hard. That's something that I just know or that I just do. And they're like, wow, that's amazing. You're right in that it reminds you of actually all of the things that you've learned and acquired over time that just become unconscious because it's just what we do every day. And it may not always be in our tool belt for, weekly or day to day. You might have something that you pull out every 6 months and, something over here that you kind of learnt from and you build on. And like I said, if we're using that car analogy, as you're putting the car together, the intuition has to come because there's no plans with it. I think being able to reflect back to other people who are not as far ahead as yourself is a really powerful way to learn and have that contrast to go, there's so much actually that I do know, and having that openness to just share that knowledge as well is just something that I know many practitioners really value and appreciate, being able to have someone like yourself, Hugh, that they can call and say, hey, how would you deal with this, and how would you deal with that, and a client's presented with this, what should I be thinking of? I think that's really powerful.
Well, it's also interesting because I did a lot of my early orthobionomy training with a woman called Kathy Kane, who some people may know. She's now travels the world. She's a trauma specialist, and so she's been doing this for 40 years now. She's exceptional. But when I was learning from her, and we were thinking, oh my God, Kathy Kane, she's extraordinary, and she had about 20 odd years experience. She was back then where I am now. And so instead of kind of looking at her and thinking, oh my God, she's now got 40 years experience, it's like, oh, wow, actually, I'm about the same point as she was when she was teaching. It's like, and there's something really affirming about that. And remembering that is quite cool. And then, when people start asking your advice about stuff, it's like, oh yeah, actually, I do know stuff.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So with some of the struggles that you've experienced in your life, what are some learnings? What have you learned about yourself? If you've got I would say your wife as one of your cheer people that's cheering you on and encouraging the perseverance, What are some things that you've learnt about yourself in the process of that over the years?
I think what I have learned is that I know stuff and that I know how to apply it. Sometimes how I communicate it can be a little bit complicated, but but I do, that I know stuff, and it's more so much that I've developed a confidence in that. So it's been a kind of slow, incremental development as opposed to kind of a big learning. So I've developed a kind of trust in what I know, and a trust in the modalities that I use as well, and a confidence in that.
And I think, again, you make a great point about applying it. Knowledge is great, and we can tell our clients to drink water, for example, until the cows come home. But if we're sitting in there, we haven't had much water that day, in fact, for the last week or so, there's such an incongruence that happens. Whereas if we're showing up, like, for example, if you're working in therapy with someone and you're noticing your own stuff getting in the way, it inhibits our ability to help that client get an outcome. But if we're able to notice that our stuff gets in the way, move that to the side, serve the client, and then come out of the room and go, now what's going on there? What can I learn about this? Or what do I know about this? That actually, if I pull out of my therapist hat or out of my therapist bag and kind of apply that in my own life, how could I move through that and heal that part?
Well, I think, yeah, it's true. And I think also there's that in sitting with difficulty and sitting with discomfort. Like, actually, I've got to know myself much more, and I think I'm repeating myself in saying, and I've got more confidence in myself. There's something about this. It's like, I'm not quite so flighty as I used to be. It's they're the things I've learned about. Like, I've actually learned about myself. It's not as I said, it's not things I've learned about myself. As I've actually got to know myself.
Yeah.
In a much greater way, and I think that's helped by difficulty, and I actually think that's helped by struggling. I think it's actually a worthwhile process. Now, I might be slightly masochistic, but but I think there's been something really beneficial in that.
Yeah.
As well.
What are your thoughts on, and I think you've kind of said this, but I'll ask it anyway, our ability to sit in our own stuff or sit with our own stuff actually enhances our ability to be present with others.
Well, yeah, because I think we're not so scared then of when stuff happens with our clients. We're not so disturbed by, like, if I'm comfortable with myself emotionally and the client on the table gets emotional, then I'm less inclined to kind of make a big deal of it, or less inclined to try and fix it, or less inclined to try and take it away, or less inclined to kind of dive further into it. It's just like, oh yeah, that happens sometimes with body work. And so it's kind of, it's held, but we don't necessarily need to deal with it. That's slightly different in psychotherapy because it's something that we might kind of pull apart and explore more. But somebody being present as we're having a response to something is kind of, I think, is really powerful. Yeah, I think it is just being present. By being present, I mean not necessarily reacting or not reacting to things. So it's just like, oh yeah, that happens. And I think there's something quite reassuring for a lot of people about that as well. And it kind of normalizes.
Yeah, that's right. When we can hold space, because so many times we want to rescue. That's the kind of default position, is either stop it, don't want to hear about it in society, not so much in our treatment rooms, or, oh my God, it's going to be okay, you're going to be fine, and kind of that rescue. And it's, I'm kind of, for those that are listening, it's like a yucky kind of digging process to kind of get them out of it. And I think when we have the capacity to hold the space for someone, which is, in our training rooms, one of the things that we say is hold the space for people. And if they have this salty water come down their face, let it happen and don't touch them. We don't want to anchor that stuff into their body. Just allow them to have a breakthrough. And what actually comes up for you as a result of that is usually your own stuff, which is also incredibly reflective and sometimes a little bit challenging. And it's powerful to watch this person break through and other people going, but I really want to touch them, I want to hug them. And it's like, I'm being cold. And it's like, no, actually, it's called just holding the space. Hand them a couple of tissues and just let it be.
Again, yeah, I mean, I think it's probably something that's not spoken about in massage very much, but in psychotherapeutic terms, I'm not going to go there, but there's a transference and a countertransferential, or a transference and a countertransference. So what we're feeling may be what's happening in the shared space. It may not necessarily be ours. So that can be a little confusing as well. But as you said, it's about, or as you said before, it's about sort of going back afterwards and reflecting on that and going, okay, is that familiar to me? What happened there? Did it persist throughout my next 3 clients, or as the person walked out, was it like, oh God, something's changed? So it's so I think it can be a little bit more nuanced than that, because I think there's also the risk of us think badly of ourselves because we've had a particular response, or think badly of the person because they've had a particular response. But I think it can also be that there's something happened in the shared space, which is partly ours, partly theirs, which has become something quite different. Actually.
And you make a great point, because it is that when we get in rapport with someone, their thoughts become our words and vice versa. Like, we feel what they're feeling. And if we can then reflect later to go, like you said, did it walk out the door with them? Did it stay with me? Is it still with me? Why did I get wobbly with them? Is it because I was in rapport with them, or is it because I wanted to rescue them? And I think this comes down to our ability to sit in our own stuff and to become comfortable. And I don't think this is something you wake up one day and go, oh, great. Oh, look, I've got stuff I need to deal with. How wonderful. I think all of us have experienced a much less kind experience than that. That's usually our own stuff being thrown in our face or flipped in our face by other people. My kids are a classic example of throwing my own stuff in my face, that it kind of happens in a less than kind way, and then reflecting afterwards to be able to go, okay, what was their stuff? They were in a bad mood, they'd had a bad day, they were hungry, all the things, and what was my stuff that I thought I heard but actually wasn't what they were saying at all. To be able to disassociate or differentiate between them and me.
And I think if there's things happening in people's bodies as well, then touch is so potent that when we're touching someone, that transference can be quite strong as well, more than just sitting in a room. So if we're doing quite intuitive massage as well, then we're going to be feeling much more of what's happening within their body as well.
Definitely.
So
this is probably something that I think, because of your work as a psychotherapist, that you can actually shed quite a lot of light on. But one of the questions I wanted to ask is, what does business trauma mean for you? And you're welcome to answer that with your business hat on as Hugh, and you're also welcome to answer that with your psychotherapist hat on, based on your experience of what you know about trauma.
So I kind of careful about using the word trauma, I guess, because it would be personal difficulties within the business, and that I think they'd be doubt, doubting my own ability, doubting my capacity to make a living out of this, making enough money to make pursuing this worthwhile. I think they're the kind of business traumas. I think from a business sense wise, I've actually been quite blessed in a lot of ways, and there haven't been a lot of overheads and things like that. So those financial, oh my God, haven't been so great. But when things are quiet, it's the doubt, it's the concern that there's not enough money coming in to have the kind of lifestyle that I want.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And in terms of, I know that you deal with you work with people who are currently experiencing or have experienced trauma in the past. What is trauma, and what are some of the avenues that you work with people around?
I guess I've been thinking about this the last few days, after a conversation on Saturday night with a couple of friends, and because trauma isn't an event. It's more a response. So it's how we respond to the things that are happening. Do we respond in a way that's well regulated? Do we respond in a way where we're slightly disturbed, but it's kind of okay? Or do we respond in a way where we completely flip out into a kind of fight-flight response and then can kind of bring ourselves back? Or do we flip out and then end up and not being able to get out of that fight-flight response? Or alternatively, we then escalate into a freeze response and we can't get out of that. So I guess in a kind of nutshell kind of way, it's I would kind of think of trauma as where we get stuck in the fight, flight, or freeze response, or oscillating between the two, that we don't get into that more restorative state. That's what when I think of trauma, that's kind of what I'm thinking. And that's a kind of big trauma. And there's also more subtle responses in that, and part of that may be that I won't even go there actually, but there's more subtle responses within that as well.
So the interesting thing there that you said is that trauma isn't necessarily an event. It's our response to an event or events. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
I think that's really, it's such a subtle but powerful shift. I know for me, just, if you had said to me, what is trauma, I would have thought of particularly a traumatic event, but not necessarily thought of my response to that. And one of the first things you said there was that normally if we've experienced a large event, like a large emotional event, and we have the ability to regulate, be shocked, go, wow, deal with whatever it is, and then regulate our way back down, that's a fairly common, is that what we would expect a healthy, well, safe and mature person to do?
Yeah, let's say yes. Yeah. I just wanted to give an example. Like I know someone who was in Afghanistan, had I think he said he had 6 or 7, might have been even more, might have been 8 or 9 tours of Afghanistan, and saw a lot of combat there as well. And but while he was there was a real appreciation of the beauty of the country. There's an appreciation of the culture. There was an appreciation of the history. There was an appreciation of the context of why they were there. There was an appreciation that one place they stopped and camped was where Alexander the Great had to stop to see out a winter. So there was this much greater context. And as his wife said, I know he's got his demons, but he's actually quite well adjusted. So there are things that you'd think that this is a guy who's potentially going to have PTSD from his combat experience, but there was a kind of wider context. So that helped to mitigate the effects of some of the things that he went through. In fact, I think he said that some of his colleagues helped out with an earthquake, and there were civilians who were injured, and they said that was far more traumatic for them, and was genuinely traumatic. That sent them into a PTSD. They developed PTSD from that, not so much from their experiences within combat and the like. So I thought that was kind of an interesting, in regards to, it's not the event, it's our response to it. And there's a lot of things which mitigate or affect our response to it. In this case, also a much wider context, historical context as well, but also a sense of kind of meaning and purpose from within what it was doing as well.
It's so, and I love this kind of work in terms of, you talked about The Body Keeps the Score before, and there's another book that I've read by John Sarno, A Divided Mind by John Sarno, referenced in The Body Keeps the Score. And he talks about how it's like the meaning that we attach to pain is often the lens that which we will experience pain. Now, whether that's physical or emotional or both. And I think all of us would see clients that some people come in and like, oh, I've got a pain. And you think, where? Like, you're poking around for it and it just is nowhere. And someone else comes in and you're like, hey, you doing? Yeah, fine. And you start to work and you're like, yeah, I'm not fine. And they'll be like, I know I have one client who'll say, oh, you know, my calves are a bit sore. And he gets on the table. I'm like, so who pissed you off? You know, who's annoyed you? Because you want to get on the bike and hurt your calves when someone's annoyed you. So what's been going on? But won't say that he's probably had leg cramps for 3 weeks. You know, like the meaning that they attach to their pain and their condition vastly affects their ability to regulate themselves through a pain episode. And I've always found that fascinating.
Well, but it also makes sense that when we've got pain, we want to find a reason for it. So, like I also work in the refugee area, and yeah, there's a lot of trauma, a lot of really serious trauma, and yeah, in fact, they'll come in with a bad back and say, yeah, the MRI said I've got a protruding disc, and you'll have a look at the MRI. It says minimally protruding, no impingement on nerve roots, and but that's what helps them to make meaning of the pain, not the fact that they've lived in a war zone, they've lost family members, they've been their life's been threatened, they've had to live in Jordan for a number of years, they've made their way to Australia, and now they're living in poverty, whatever variation on that. So, but equally, I guess in the situation you said, it's sometimes the meaning that we place on the pain is that we're pissed off with someone, just as a way of, because otherwise the pain doesn't make sense. So it kind of makes sense that we're trying to make sense of our experience by whatever means possible. It feels like there's a bit more to that, but I can't quite make the link at the moment. Sorry.
It's great. And I think there'll be lots of people listening to this going, yeah. And some people listen to this going, yeah, like you've probably known it, but you maybe never articulated it in this way, which is why this is the purpose to the podcast, is to really just be able to expand on ideas and thoughts that are not just a trigger point is a hyper irritable spot within a taut band of skeletal muscle that gives rise to characteristic referred pain and dysfunction. Still there, like it's a trigger point, great. But that doesn't, there's so much more to our bodies and our mind and pain, and the multifaceted approach that we have, I think, allows for a greater level of understanding, but also a greater level of healing and outcome for the body to restore itself back to balance in a way that the body believes is balanced.
Well, I think, and I mean, a lot of people may have heard also of Lorimer Moseley from, I think it's, what is it, Body and Mind Institute. I think he's got various things, but he's a big researcher in chronic pain. And part of his thing is that you listen to people's stories. So even if the story fits with the pain, it doesn't matter by listening to it. Well, and now I'm paraphrasing, and by people feeling as though they've been listened to within that, then that kind of sinks down. And sometimes the actual, if the cause of the pain, for want of a better expression, can start to emerge. But maybe there's something also in their pain story as well, which is like, okay, there's something in that, but just being heard can allow what we spoke before about regulation, about allowing people to regulate a little bit more, and then there's the possibility of perhaps some of the pain. So this is very unclear, but with the regulation, the body can go into a restorative state, and that creates the conditions for the pain conditions to change or start to resolve.
Look, I remember once a lady came to see me, and she told me the same pain story. So every time she came in, I'd hear the same story, and there was no dementia or anything like that, but she'd say she had chronic neck pain. We did what we could. I did craniosacral and Bowen therapy as well as remedial massage. And so I understand that people don't always get what it is that you do, because you kind of package it all together and do, there for whatever the client needs. And she'd always say, I turned to my husband, I turned my head to the right, we were hit from behind, and that's when it hurt. And she ended up having an MRI that discovered she'd had a mild stroke at point of impact of the car. And as soon as she articulated that to me and to others, and she was given that, she never mentioned it again. And this was like a 2-year story. Every month I'd hear the same thing every single month. And part of me was going, before I was aware, I was like, what do I need to know this for? Like, it seems important to you, but I couldn't link what she was telling me and how that was related until she said, so they've just discovered that I had a stroke at point of impact. So when I turned my head to my husband and I was impacted I actually had a mini stroke. And as soon as that information came out, she never spoke about it. And it was such a beautiful moment of learning in that kind of, action precedes clarity moment of working with someone and just kind of gathering information, putting different pieces together of the car on the driveway. That was one of those pieces came together in a really powerful way to go, always listen to their stories. There's always something in the story that we can learn as clinicians to help these people understand what it is, what's going on in their body.
Well, and also when that new bit of information comes out and it's a fresh bit of information, and when there's the same story and it's like we don't see beyond the realms of the story, but then a fresh bit of information, it's like a window opening. It's just like, oh, it's almost like a piece of a jigsaw fits into place and something is able to just come together in a different way. I know this is the purpose of the podcast, but I think there's a couple of things happening there. One, it's that something's changed, that they're able to allow a fresh bit of the story in, but that fresh bit of the story also allows more change as well.
Yeah.
It's we probably all have that client who says, the pain's the same. And then later on in the session, they're talking and saying, oh yeah, I'm sleeping 8 hours a night. It's just like, what? It's like, oh, that's they say, oh, nothing's changed. And they'll mention they're sleeping 8 hours a night instead of 3. And it's like, okay, hold on. So your pain may not have changed, but actually there's some other stuff happening here.
Some other really good results, some byproducts.
Yeah, that's a big deal. I guess it is. Yeah, right.
Yeah. Hugh, knowing what you know now, what would you say to yourself in the early 2000s as you were learning and wrestling and struggle and all the things that were coming up for you in terms of confidence around what you were doing and cheer squad, all that stuff? Knowing what you know now, what would you say anything different to yourself? And if so, what might it be?
I would probably say keep persevering, keep applying what you know and keep learning. And maybe, I was going to say it will come together, but maybe it won't. Maybe it'll come together, but you'll have picked up a whole pile of valuable things and you'll have gotten to know yourself a whole lot more, which isn't what you want right now, but in 20 years, you'll find that really valuable. I'm not sure that's the type of advice that I would have wanted in 2000.
You may not have been ready to open up and receive that advice right then, but that's what you know now. That's what you said.
Yeah. It's a type of advice that 20 years later, you look back and go, oh, that was good advice. But at the time you go, oh, mate, no, that's not what I want to hear.
I love it. Hugh, you do some really beautiful work you've shared today. You do some work with people who are refugees. You've worked with people who are ex-servicemen and a bunch of other people who have experienced really full-on trauma in their life. Because of what you have learnt in terms of your qualifications, the experiences you've had as a clinician and also as a person, as a husband, etc., what would you say are some of the greatest impacts that you've had on the world because of what you've learned?
God, I don't know that I've had much of an impact on the world. I mean, I think I've had an impact on individuals and that's perhaps rippled out, but it's been much quieter than that actually, because it's the world doesn't want to listen to me. There's enough going on, but every now and again somebody learns something really valuable from the work we're doing, from what I've got to say, from the discussions we have, and that makes a difference So I'd say it's the accumulated effect of the work with individuals, and then what they've done with that to build on that for themselves, and quite likely made that into something that I didn't even envisage at the time, but they've made that into something meaningful with it, or they've made that into something which has brought more meaning into their lives.
It's almost like perhaps for them they didn't start with car pieces. Perhaps the trauma might have exploded the car on the driveway. And it sounds like the unintended consequences of you helping them teaching them how to put it back together for themselves. Because I know that's a lot of the work that you do is not, you don't go in to fix them, so to speak. It's certainly not the language I've ever heard you use. It's very much, you've got the resources within you, let me just help you connect a few dots, which is allowing others to put their own pieces together to end up with a very unique and individual and wonderful car that they then get to drive around and live life in a vastly different way than perhaps they ever thought they would, but a way that they can actually drive it.
I think that's an interesting analogy for trauma, in that we spend a lot of time trying to put the thing together, and it comes in like Frankenstein's monster, and it comes apart, and then we eventually give up and walk off, and walk instead of trying to drive. Or buy a bicycle, or buy a different car. It's because we can spend a lot of time trying to fix something, and I didn't mean it to become a kind of thing about trauma, but in trauma often it's about it's not about fixing something. It's about getting to know ourselves enough within that instead of trying to put the car back together, we, as I said, we jump on the bike, or we walk, or we get a taxi, or whatever.
Yeah, and learn a different way to get around, learn a different way to interact with the world, different lens.
Or we learn that we don't need to do that. We just don't need to. Actually, that's perhaps not that important.
Yeah.
And that we don't need to do that.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Hugh, thank you for your wisdom today. Thank you for sharing your incredible knowledge with us.
I'm not sure how much wisdom there is. I'm happy to share what it is that I know. And if that's useful, then that's good.
And the purpose is really to be able to allow, like we said, therapists to be able to either go, yes, this is what I'm talking, I see this, I feel this, I experience this every day, but I've maybe not had the capacity for language. I know for myself, as I developed my intuition as a practitioner, I would sometimes experience other people's pain a week before they came in. And this happened for a good 10 years before I ever voiced that, because I thought I was nuts. Honestly, like I would experience sudden onset arthritic pain in my hands, and that's not meant to happen. And I'm looking at my hands going, there's nothing wrong with them. Like, I don't understand. I'd have treatment, I'd do all sorts of different things. And then I'd have a client who would come in with that problem or with that pain. I would treat them, I would nurture them because I knew what they needed, and my pain would disappear. And it wasn't until one of my beautiful therapists said, oh, I finally did a PNF stretch on a client, and man, my back feels so much better. And I'm like, do you experience other people's pain too? She goes, oh, all the time. And for her, it was nothing. And I'm thinking I'm this freak weirdo. And it wasn't something that I'd ever heard of, that we can actually mirror someone else's pain, and we don't even have to be in the room with them. We can experience it a week or two before they come in. Certainly not every patient, thankfully, because I was seeing a lot at one point, and I don't think I'd like to live in that much pain. But it did help, I think, with the intuition to be able to build rapport with those people. And that's really just the opportunity for these podcasts, is for people to be able to take from it what works and what serves them, learn from it, and maybe apply it in practice in ways that they find, resourceful and beneficial to them.
Yeah. I think, and on that, it's because it's also getting the kind of a fresh perspective, which opens up perhaps another line of, oh, I wonder, and just developing the confidence in that is so valuable. Actually.
So amazing, Hugh. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate having you.
Yeah, lovely. No, great to talk to you, Alicia. Cheers.